So with me here today is my friend Yahya Soliman. He is a forensic accountant. He's worked at big four firms, but that's actually not why or the specific topic that we're going to be talking about today. Me and Yahya have something very interesting in common, is that we are both expat kids. We are, I would say, either second or third generation people that have grown up entirely in the UAE. In fact, we're from the same town, Al Ain, which is almost like a small little town, probably an hour away from Dubai. And we grew up there, wonderful place to grow up. So Yahya, just go ahead and introduce yourself. And
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm Yahya Soliman. I was actually born in Dubai.
yeah.
But grew up in Al Ain, which is like you said, a tiny village really compared to Dubai.
What was a village back then? I don't know if you've been there recently.
There's been some development, but what's actually interesting about Al Ain is that they're not allowed to build buildings that are taller than 8 floors.
Yeah.
So it's still a very low-rise area, and it's spread out over a pretty large space, but it still has that village vibe
Yeah.
for sure. So grew up there in the 90s, and then actually we later found out after we became friends completely randomly that your sister and myself went to the same school, and we actually knew each other. And our dads knew each other as well. So our dads worked together in some previous life. Growing up in the UAE obviously is a very different experience back then than it is now. In the 90s, there wasn't much to do.
Nothing. And well, I would argue that there still isn't much to do in Al Ain per se. There might be some few things here and there, but it's interesting that town has more or less retained its identity through the years. But UAE has become so different from when we grow up. What do you think are the biggest changes that you've seen from the 90s to 2000s to 10s and now going into the 20s? Like, what do you see?
Oh gosh. So I remember like Dubai. So we used to go to Dubai on the weekends, and Dubai was pretty much Deira and Bar Dubai. And that was it really. If you're going towards like Jumeirah or Trade Center, it was like you're really going far out. And I remember driving to Dubai from LA, and the first thing you could always see is the Trade Center. And then in the late 90s, I think it was, you could start to see the Emirates Towers, and that was it. It was like the only 2 buildings in the horizon. And obviously, as you drive in now,
it's just skyscraper.
You can't even see those buildings anymore. They're completely disappeared from the skyline. It was a different time. Al Ain obviously was a much more restricted place. I remember when we got Al Ain Mall.
Yeah, that was a huge deal.
A big thing. That was a huge thing. And then obviously there's been further development since then. But in terms of growing up, activities were very limited. So I grew up like horse riding, polo, and ice hockey. So somewhere from the Middle East playing ice hockey growing up.
It's very odd. And actually, if you go up early enough into the Dubai Mall, still now, around 9, 10 a.m., people are practicing ice hockey games, and they have ice hockey games.
Yeah, so we used to, funnily enough, so I used to be part of a team called Al Ain Vipers, and we practiced in Healy ice rink. And that team then morphed into what's now the Dubai Oils, I think, and they practice in Dubai Mall. I thought about rejoining them years later. But
I think it's a little too late.
I'm too old. I don't know. I'm still a very strong skater, but yeah, I'm past it, I think. But I really enjoyed that, and you go around and you say, "Oh, I used to play ice hockey." People are a bit stunned by that. But we had a very good team. We were actually a very competitive team, and the UAE junior team was very competitive on an international level as well. Now, don't hold me to that, but that's what they used to tell us at least. So it was quite competitive, and then horse riding was very big, and I'm so glad I did it back then, because I don't think I'd do it now, but I still love horse riding, and I don't do it as often as I'd like to, but it was...
I think that in the past, UAE indulged in more traditional sports, what they considered to be very high-end, like horses or, it's been interesting seeing the development of all facets of sports life increase, from like basketball to soccer and everything of that nature. But I think that's just a product of having a very multicultural society. And I think that is pretty hard to wrap your head around is, okay, you have kids from like 100 different nationalities all going into the same school, and what ends up happening is that they all end up sounding American. Like,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's weird because I did go to a British school, and I went to a university in the UK, and all my teachers were from the UK and all the rest of it, but I still have this accent.
why do you think that is? Why do you think that when we all go to school, we are all like, okay, is there, did we have a meeting in preschool? It's like, what is the simplest English method that we could all?
It's pretty amazing. I think, and I've seen this actually across the world, not just in here in the UAE, but people really, their accents really reflect their home culture. So at home, we spoke English more than Arabic, maybe slightly to my parents' frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we were having a more native
Upbringing.
sounding
Yeah.
English accent. Well, whilst a lot of my classmates, their accents kind of stayed true to what their culture was. So, the Arabs had more of an Arab twang, the Indians had more of an Indian twang, and so on and so forth. But I think the Americanness of it comes from two things. One is TV.
A lot of TV.
A lot of TV, because let's face it, in the 90s especially, there wasn't much to do,
Yeah,
at least during the weekdays, so there's a lot of watching TV. But also, I think because we're such a multicultural society, we try to find the easiest way to communicate with each other. And I think the English, or the British or the Australian, or some of these accents are harder to understand for people who aren't speaking English at a native level. So everyone, I don't want to say dumbs down their accent, but turns down their accent to the point where it's the most easy to understand. And I've had friends who've come from Scotland, from places like Yorkshire or whatever. And when they first get here, their accents are quite strong,
but they slowly dissipate over time.
And they don't notice it. But as someone who's listening to them over time, you certainly notice it. And then obviously their families back home also notice it. And everyone just kind of winds it down. And what's interesting, I also have some friends who are, English, for example, and they have kids who are born and raised here, and their kids now are starting to have this American accent, which they're very frustrated about as well. So I think it all just reflects, how your upbringing, your kind of in-home culture, what you're doing, and all the rest of it kind of plays into it. And I think some people are just more phonetically tuned in than others. I have friends that are, they're very accomplished. They've gone to some top universities, and they still have their homegrown accent. And, they could be very smart at maths or sciences or whatever, but linguistically, they're not very gifted, and they only speak the one language or maybe two languages at most. So yeah, it's just kind of roll with it. I don't overthink it, really.
It's true. And what you see with kind of minority kids growing up in different countries, like, for example, the US or the UK or any country really, is that the next generation tends to lose their ability to be bilingual or as fluent, but we're perfectly fluent in our native tongues.
Yes.
So I think that there's an interesting aspect of the UAE. Since you grow up here, you're not going to naturalize as a citizen. Everyone understands that. So I think there's a stronger desire to cling to your roots, and one of the things being language. This is why I love talking to Yahya, because it's interesting, because I feel like no one really challenges me on my views because they haven't had the same lived experience, but you have.
Hot take. Okay. I don't know. Yes, part and parcel is that not being a citizen of this country, you understand it doesn't matter how long you've lived here, or you will live here, or you were born here. Chances are you're not going to become a citizen. Now, there are some exceptions, obviously, some exceptional cases, granted. But I don't know. For me, this is home. I don't view my home country. I don't feel an affinity towards my home country. I don't know about you, but I don't feel like, I'm trying to speak Arabic as a part of like a tribal mindset.
But it's just a language that you picked up from your family, essentially.
Obviously, and if you are a native Arabic speaker going in through the education system in the UAE, you have to learn Arabic as a first language. It's not optional for non-native speakers. They have the option of taking it as a first language or as a second language. So learning it in school was kind of mandatory. And for a long time in my professional career, obviously I've been, working since 2013. So we're in the 13th year now. Learning Arabic or speaking Arabic was not that great, or not that great, but it wasn't that coveted, let's say. So all the work was in English. Having Arabic as a backup language was great, but not
practically applicable.
Not practically applicable. And now it's becoming very in demand. So, I had to definitely brush up on my business terminology in Arabic and be able to,
speak fluently and confidently
and write reports and, work in Arabic, especially with, the Saudi market exploding the way it has. A lot of the work in Saudi is in Arabic. They're not kind of bending to English, at least not yet. But because a lot of the contracts are driven by the government, and the government is just Arabic. And if you don't speak Arabic,
you're out of luck. Someone else is getting that $100 million contract.
Obviously, in the UAE, it's much more developed, and there's a much bigger private sector. And in the private sector, there are multinational companies that deal all over the world, and that's how they want to structure their business environment. And they've had a lot of success in that. Saudi is obviously still in the developing stages, so they're very much government driven, and the government is Arabic. You don't speak Arabic, tough luck. I've seen it personally, through the recruitment and through other things, that Arabic now is like very hot. Like if you speak Arabic, you're at a much higher advantage in the job market. And that's not just here in the UAE, also, in other markets in Europe and even in the US to a certain extent, having Arabic is becoming a much more lucrative skill. So for me, like my linguistic capabilities have always been a transactional thing. It's like, if you speak this language, these are the advantages you get. So you invest the time in learning it. In another life, I used to, more fluent in French than I am now. So French was something that I actively went out into the world and tried to learn. I used to go to institutes and, take classes, and did a summer thing at a university to try to learn French. And then I went to Spain. I studied in Spain as well. So I used to speak Spanish in another life. I can't say I confidently speak that, but it was always a transactional thing. It was always,
it's also very encouraged by the region to know as many languages as possible, because it is an interconnecting point for so many people from all over the world.
Yeah.
And well, I guess growing up, you do learn your native tongue. You can pick a third language as well while you're going to school. What would you say is the educational experience? Because I feel like it can vary so dramatically depending on which school you go to. Yeah. And I think that was I don't know if anyone that grows up here, but a big flex to other people was like, oh, my kid goes to this school or that school. It is a big kind of class signifier. So did you think that, the model used to be, okay, put your kids in the best possible private school and then send them to college somewhere in Europe or London or the US in an Ivy League potentially, and then come back here for a high-paying job, or keep them there for a high-paying job? Do you think that that's still very much the model, or do you see kids kind of staying here for education, or do you think that that's going to change at all?
I think it has changed, and I think it will continue to change in a positive direction. So, when I was growing up, we had, in Al Ain at least, we had one school that was a British curriculum school. Yeah. The rest were quasi-American / British.
Or they did both curriculums, and in the end you pick which exam you're going to take.
But they didn't really specialize. It was kind of a free-for-all. But the schooling has always been fantastic, to be honest. Like primary, secondary school has always been very good. You could get very good education for not that much money, at least back in the 90s. And I know school prices have exploded since then, but there's always been a range. Like you can obviously be at the very high end.
Oh, you get multi-child discounts. That was my favorite thing. 'Cause, we're family of 5, so 50% off for each additional kid or something.
Well, so the school that I went to with your sister, so that was one of the more elite schools.
Yeah.
But everyone there, their parents didn't actually pay for their education. If they work, there's a very big hospital in Alain, and if you worked at the hospital, they covered your tuition.
Was it just the Alain Hospital?
No, it's Toam.
Oh, okay, I know Toam.
Yeah. So a lot of the parents were kids of people who worked at the hospital. There's also a university there that's just for Emiratis. I don't remember the exact name of it. But again, if you're a professor at that universities, your
kids get to those schools.
Yeah. At least, I don't know how it is now, but that's how it was back then. So a lot of them, were not very affluent kids, but because their parents were professors or doctors or whatever, they got free education, and this was the school that you got sent to. And it was a very good school. It was considered expensive at the time, but now I don't know how much the fees are a year now. But when I compared how much it was back then to what you can get now, I mean it's definitely probably be on the cheaper end of things. But it was a great school. Again, it was a dedicated British curriculum, which was good. So I did very well on my GCSEs. But then at the time there weren't that many universities.
No, not at all.
That were sort of in play. I think Qatar was making a much bigger push in the sort of the higher education sector. I remember when I was graduating, Cornell, I think, had just opened in Qatar. And then, eventually some universities had opened here. And more have opened since. There's now Birmingham University, I think, and a few.
Rochester's open.
Rochester, right. I actually have one of my colleagues who went to Rochester. And obviously NYU in Abu Dhabi now was huge. And I think NYU was, I don't know if it still is, but it was free education, basically. Basically if you get rolled in, you got a scholarship kind of thing just to kind of build up the student role. So it was very lucrative for a lot of people. And then there's the Sorbonne and all the rest of it. And then Dubai has also made a big push in the graduate degrees as well. So you got a lot of executive and MBA and executives MBA now based in the UAE. So it's definitely much more of an academic prospect post-school. Whether people are taking it on or not is, TBC. But I definitely had a few colleagues that came in after me, so they're more junior than I am, that have studied in the UAE. So I had one colleague who's actually from the US, and he moved to NYU in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
And then I have another colleague now that I work with now who's studied in Rochester.
Which just makes sense in the end of the day. If you spent your whole time going to uni here, just getting into it, I feel like the seats for international schools have become more competitive.
Yes.
I think that there is this massive expat community that doesn't necessarily want their kids to go far away for university, and even people, working professionals that want to stay and keep their job in the Middle East and then go and get their master's degree.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think the abroad has become a lot less lucrative. I mean, I studied abroad, and it was a lot of fun. Obviously, just kind of getting away and experiencing something new. But then it's not really livable, and that's why.
Wait. Okay, why isn't it livable? Yeah.
Oh, it's not clean. It's not safe. It's too expensive. It's I mean.
Well, I've recently started traveling extensively. I've never traveled much in the past 2 years, and then my wife always says, "Oh, you lived in Dubai or UAE your whole life. You're never going to be able to live anywhere else." Like, do you see yourself ever living anywhere else anytime soon, or do you imagine? So whenever I travel, I kind of imagine myself living like in the country that I'm visiting for a period of time.
I think I used to be like that, and I'm like, oh wow, that's the novelties eventually wear off. But I think about things very practically now. I don't want to live in a tiny flat. I'm much more of a suburban kind of guy. I like having a backyard and a barbecue and all the rest of it. I'm not going to take public transportation. No. I know I sound a bit spoiled saying that, but I need to have a car because I do like to do excursions. I play golf, so I want somewhere with amenities and that's easy to drive in. So that kind of rules out a lot of the a lot of the world for me. So I'm open-minded, but I've had recruiters, headhunters from abroad who approach me every now and again about opportunities in this country or that country or blah, 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 blah. And some of these countries, I'm like, unless, I'm getting double, triple the pay, like it just doesn't make any sense. Because first of all, most of them, half of your salary goes to taxes.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
that just kind of rules
I
it
know
out.
I know a little bit about that. Like,
Oh yeah, obviously, you're the expert on that. So for me, like the idea of paying taxes is just completely ridiculous to me. I'm not gonna pay income tax.
yeah, because
Sorry.
over here, I would say, well, people say you don't have income tax here. You almost get to pick what you're going to get taxed on in a certain way. It's a consumption-based taxes.
Yes.
So you could save all of your money if you want to live very simply, but the finer things in life are here whenever you want them. And
Well, and to be honest, so in the US, for example, there's obviously federal taxes and then there's state tax, and different states structure their tax differently. Some of them are high VAT, low income tax, and others are high income tax and lower VAT tax, and they fiddle around with it that way. But it's one thing if you're like if there is a 5% income tax, you say okay.
Yeah.
If there's a 10%, you say okay. Like
you're pushing it a little bit.
Yeah. What am I getting something out of it? If it's like 45, 50%,
No,
you're
that's
like,
ridiculous.
come on, and they say like, oh yeah, but the education is free. But okay, is the quality of education any good, or
who's auditing the expenses of the government?
Yeah, because I'd rather have that money and then pick the school.
Yeah.
Rather than have the school be picked for me based on where I live. It's again, gas tax, car tax, this tax, that tax.
And I've never believed like taxes is a good method of like wealth transfer distribution to providers, because it's never worked properly.
Yeah. And traveling, studying abroad and all that, I'd say that to people, and I say that to people when I meet them overseas, and they're out, like it's become so ingrained in some mentalities that how could you not want to pay taxes, because it benefits, whoever it supposedly benefits. I was like, there's poverty all over your countries. Like, who's it benefiting exactly?
How much? Well, the question is, do you know how much they're pocketing for themselves or laundering out, or like, which is a valid question, right? Like, do you really need X or Y firm that you paid $5 million for a logo? Like, clearly that's money laundering, right?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, it's so I was anti-tax, because I grew up in the UAE, and I love the system that you don't put anything in and you don't get anything out. There's no social safety net, but you get to pocket, and it incentivizes you to go into the world and actually be as productive as you can be, and it rewards you for doing good work and and making it in life. And then you go to these other, like the developed world, whatever that is anymore, and they have high taxes, increasingly high taxes, and punitive taxes, really, and they have massive poverty. There's a lot of homelessness. There's a lot of all sorts of issues that they have, and it's just made me more capitalistic and more anti-tax. And I'm very now. I used to be like, I'd rather not pay tax, but now I'm like actively anti-tax.
And I think that one of the countries I visited last year, not this year, was Singapore, and then I came to realize like some of the policies were kind of built around what Singapore had done initially. I was like, oh, this is proto Dubai, like this is what they were going for. But I guess then they eventually did increase the tax rate. But even in Singapore, it's like 20% on their income, or not that much. But
I know they have some income tax, but again, it's nowhere near what you get elsewhere. Yeah, so that's a big thing.
Yeah.
so that's a big thing of where I decide to go.
I don't think you're gonna move.
So that limits a lot of the world. And I don't know, like life here is just so easy and convenient, and
even if you have a high stress job, I've seen like kind of really high stress white collar professionals, they then take the extra money to then de-stress or recover. Like, you like to golf extensively. I know a friend that hits a spa, like the nicest place in town in the Palm, just to relax and recover. And I think that your money can then be used wherever you see fit to recover from you being a high performer, essentially.
Absolutely. And Dubai is also very nicely placed. Like, Europe is a few hours away, and then East Asia's a few hours away. So it's really good, because when I was younger, I traveled a lot westward, and now that I'm getting a bit older, I'm traveling a lot eastward, and I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
It's a completely different world. It's not as great like Europe now. Like to travel as a tourist is just insane in terms of get crowded and all the processes and everything else. Asia is actually quite amazing,
Yeah.
and it's a lot more welcoming of tourism for sure.
Well, speaking of tourism, like one of the big things that people say is like, well, you'll eventually become a citizen or naturalize and get a passport. As people that are sitting here with, I declare my passport as pretty bad. I think fourth worst in the world. Yours is not the best either, but we go all over the world all the time. How do you feel about that being a major disadvantage in terms of like, well, you can't go anywhere at any time? Or
it's getting easier.
Yeah.
It's getting a lot easier than it was, pre-COVID, I'd say, or even before that. I think countries are recognizing that there's a way to do it where they can attract tourism in a responsible way and without making it too difficult.
Yeah.
And also like there's no indication, it's getting a lot more blurred that if you're from a certain country, you're less likely to, overstay your visa or whatever. And I think a lot of the Asian countries are seeing that actually people like from Europe are overstaying in places like Thailand and Bali, for example. Europeans are overstaying their visas a lot more.
Whereas people from UAE are like, I can't wait to get back.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think a lot of that is getting restructured. I mean, the UAE passport was not that strong 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Now it's one of the strongest passports in the world, and a lot more like developing country passports are rising up in the ranks. So. Yeah, part of me, thought about that. But honestly, it's like there's ways around it now. It's fine.
I mean, like, what was funny is I was having kind of, I was at a cafe with a friend from Italy, and then he was talking about how he doesn't travel as much anymore. He gets like 2 weeks a year to travel with his wife. And I'm like, okay, there's this guy sitting across from me. He's Italian. He has an Italian passport. He can jump on a plane and go anywhere at any time. But I've done like 4 times more the trips he has this year simply because, well, if you don't have enough money or time or if you're restricted one or the other, it doesn't matter what passport you have. Like,
I completely agree. And, at the end of the day, in certain countries like in the U.S., even if you live abroad, you still pay U.S. taxes above a certain threshold. And I'm like, do I want that?
No,
I definitely don't want that. You definitely don't want that. And other countries are punitive in different ways as well. Like, Australians, if you were in Australia during COVID, you couldn't leave the country. And it's just like, what? That's a bit. I mean, looking back at it, it just makes it feels like a fever dream.
You're having like a flashback.
Yeah, it all seems so crazy now. 6 years on, but that we'll have to explain that to the kids one.
That's another thing about COVID. When it happened, I was like, whatever. They said this about bird flu. They're not going to shut down the world for a year, and then it went on for 2 years. Like, I can't believe that happened.
And I'm so glad I was in the UAE then. So this is definitely like, I was like, whoa, because, Australia, I've had recruiters try to hire me out of Australia as well, and I've declined. And, in Europe and all the rest of it. And it always just seemed a lot more lucrative to stay here in the UAE. And I'm just like, ooh, I'm glad I definitely didn't. I mean, Australia is.
They were harsh.
They were harsh, and they're very petty sometimes. Like, I remember, I think it was Johnny Depp. He brought his dogs on his private jet or something silly like that. And because the dogs didn't have the right licenses, they were basically threatening him with jail time unless he did this ridiculous hostage apology video. I'm like, guys, like, chill. Honestly, like, just relax a little bit.
It's probably just tiny dogs.
It's just dogs. Like, calm down. Like, I don't know. Obviously, there are rules and whatever, but you give them a fine, a slap on the wrist. Like, it's not, punishment fits the crime and all the rest of it. It's not like this. Oh no, he has to like get on his knees and apologize for bringing his dogs to our country. So they've always been a bit nutty like that. But
I feel like UAE does take a much more measured approach and then adapts and changes the approach pretty quickly. Like, another thing about growing up here is just realizing like how quickly the laws can change. So like, for example, a big issue was like Muslim couples that wanted to get married into the UAE would require kind of like a male guardian to consent. This was a thing for a long time.
Yeah.
And this would cause a lot of issues, not because the family wasn't consenting, it's because they're far away, home countries, health issues, the non-existence of a male guardian, then they have to find some long distance cousin. And then one year they were just like, yeah, you can get civilly married in Abu Dhabi now. Like that's and it was done and dusted. And then
and it's also very similar to, which I found out very recently and I'm very happy about, is the inheritance tax, the inheritance like dissemination of inheritance. It was, if you're a Muslim, there were a lot of rules restricting, it has to be done through the Sharia way and all the rest of it. And people have very complex families and very complex relationships and estranged children and this and that. So,
the first wife and the second wife are hiding from the third wife.
In the absence of a will, Sharia law, I guess provides a guideline, but then some people want to do their own thing. And this was so a lot of Muslim wealthy families were then basing their businesses and their holdings, offshore and
in trusts
offshore, to be able to. And the UAE has always been very pragmatic. And once they realized that this is an issue, they then introduced the Abu Dhabi court registered will. So as a Muslim now you can distribute your wealth however you see fit through the system, which again is a very
beneficial
big step.
Because like, why would my male cousin 2-3 lines away get a piece of whatever I built or something? Like it can't, like in an absence of a will, okay, sure, but making a will would take you a couple hours plus a visit to the court. It's not going to be a big deal to make.
I think it's online as well. Like, you just do it through a lawyer. It costs a couple of thousand and they register it, and
so
it's done.
And that's what we also kind of love about the country, is this constant leaning towards pragmatism and quick change. There's not going to be this long legislative process to change things for the better. It's just going to happen one day and then it'll be the new normal.
Yes.
Oh my God. The days off switching from Friday, Saturday to Saturday, Sunday.
Well, I mean, it used to be Thursday, Friday.
It used to be Thursday,
we've
Friday.
done it twice now.
We've done it twice now, and it was jarring each time. The Thursday, Friday was like, and it was when it moved to Friday to Saturday, I think I was so happy that it was finally Saturday, Sunday.
Yes.
Because Fridays, yes, of course, you just need an hour or two for Jummah prayers if you're going to, which is perfectly fine. But it was so difficult not aligning with the rest of the world, where, okay, we're off on Sunday, Sunday's over Sunday, but then we got to wait till Monday. We were losing an entire workday over waiting for things coming from...
Absolutely. And to be honest, like, even when it was Thursday, Friday, like, what was it? Would have been Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah. Thank God it's Wednesday. Doesn't have the same ring to it.
Even like Wednesday afternoon back then, it was like, like BS. Like, schools were always off early on the last day of the week anyways. And parents would pick up their kids and usually not go back to work after. So it was always sort of a half day kind of anyways. And it just made a lot of sense to actually have you work in the morning and Friday until the Friday prayer, and then everybody decides what the afternoon is going to look like. I think in the government sector it's off officially, and in the private sector some businesses don't have that. And it was kind of like there was a trend. I think it started in the UK where it was like they were pushing for a 4-day work week.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, that's too short. But the 5 days is too long. So like the UAE is just like, you know what, we're just going to have 4.5 days and we're going to lead the world in that way. And
I think they are very good at picking at what to follow and what not to follow, and just kind of picking the best of whichever option seems to be most viable.
Yeah. And they're not afraid of trying things. I think a lot of,
I think like people give the government too much criticism when they try something and fail. Well, how are they supposed to find out if something works if they don't try and fail or try and succeed, right?
Yeah, and they've done that, like with the VAT, for example, when that was introduced. That was very controversial, and now it's just part of part of it. People just like 5%. Okay, fine, we'll deal with it. It's fine. And
it's not like we haven't gotten new roads and infrastructure, and they're building 2 new metro lines. Like, somebody's got to pay for this.
They got to get the money somewhere. No, I agree with that. So that it was fine. In other countries, they're way too afraid to try things, and if it doesn't work, fine, you reverse it. But I think in other countries, because it's so hard to get the legislation to implement a new system, to then have the legislation to reverse it becomes even
And
trickier.
there's a lot of money being wasted on the paperwork or the processes of getting
Yeah.
everyone together in a room to apply for changes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's a rotation of like political parties, their each views in
Yeah.
economics. I think that weirdly enough, we were kind of, I was throughout my whole life, I've been kind of on the fence of centralized government versus
Yeah.
democratic or republics. And I feel like, well, the answer seems to be whatever fits the country the best at
Right.
that moment. Like,
There's no one size fits all.
No.
Some countries are historically acclimated to certain systems, and so it's very hard to kind of change in one way or the other. And it's hard to like point at a system and be like, oh, look at how well they're doing.
Yeah.
And there's always exceptions to the rules. So it's different strokes for different folks, really.
And well, one more like interesting aspect of people speak about UAE is that since a lot of people do want to come here and settle down here and live here for the long term, it's incredibly competitive in the workforce and the labor market. Like it really pushes people beyond what they would normally have to do. How do you feel? Well, what would be your message towards like kids growing up here, explaining them how competitive the job market is, how hard it is to make in UAE? Or do you think that that's exaggerated?
No, it's definitely gone harder.
Yeah.
It's definitely gone harder. And I think, fresh grad unemployment is, I don't know if it's at an all-time, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know what the statistics are, but it feels like having back in my day, having a bachelor's degree was kind of enough to get you an entry-level position. Now it's to get at a top company, you really need to have more than that.
Yeah.
It's not good enough to, have a bachelor degree from whatever university, and you need like internships and this and that. But it's also really skill-based. So, we have computer science, for example, is very competitive. In terms of the other way around, very lucrative. If you have a computer science degree, for example, you can get into a very good jobs fresh out of university without a lot of work experience. But for example, finance is super competitive now. Everybody wants to work in private equity. Everybody wants to be in banking, and there's a lot of universities just churning out students and handing out degrees and, all the rest of it. So you're, now like to get really at a top investment bank, you really need to have an MBA or at least a master's degree. So it's getting a lot more competitive, but there are things that are differentiators. In my line of work, we still use Excel for example.
Yeah.
I don't think Excel is going away.
It's never going away. I tried. I built a firm from scratch. I was like, can we do this without Word or Excel at any? No.
Yeah.
Just step one, no.
5-year prediction, Excel is still going to be around. I don't know. So when I was coming through as a fresh grad, my Excel skills were quite good, and I would explain Excel to my supervisors at the time. And so when I'm now in a more managerial role and I'm having these fresh grads coming in,
It's regressed in terms of skills.
completely. Like I have to, as an old fart, explain to these young kids how to use Excel, which I find
very odd because when the younger people should be more in tune with technology and
Right?
things of that nature.
I mean, I'm sure there's like stuff like social media stuff that they do that they can do that I have no idea about. But basic Excel is non-existent, and so there are things that you can do as an up and comer to differentiate yourself. Like even if you're studying finance, you need to know basic computer programming, Python or whatever, C++ or whatever the hot language of the day is. It really helps out because we're dealing a lot more with big data and analytics.
It is interesting how finance has merged between like mathematics and analytics, quantitative analysis, but now also programming is becoming like a fourth leg.
Absolutely. And we deal a lot with big data, and we have specialist tech teams that I'm sure they do a lot more than this, but data harvesting and extracting data and all the rest of it has become a big part of become a big part of the job. So if you have the finance skill set, and on top of that you're able to write code, at least in a very basic way, that's a big plus. Any type of AI knowledge is now like
mandatory.
It's such a hot word now. AI anything gets a lot of attention. So if you have anything in your pocket that's AI related, at least for the next 5 minutes, it's definitely gonna help out. And you just have to stay competitive. When I was growing up, investment banking, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, blah blah blah, was the place to be. And I kind of noticed that when I was interviewing, and I had a couple of offers from top banks, and I had one which was at a top bank here in Dubai, and the interviewer, he was telling me, look, you're obviously you're very qualified, you're this, you're that, you got it all on paper, but this job is so brutal. You have to be brutal. Like, you're not gonna go home. You're gonna work. You're gonna do this. You're gonna do that. Blah, blah, all the rest of it. And and I was so glad that he was this
blunt with you.
He was this honest, because I'm sure he's been through the mill a few times, and they bring in a candidate who's seems perfect, but then can't hack it within a few months or within a year, and they have to do the process all over again. So they want to make sure that whoever comes over sticks around. And I just did a little thing, because it was between this or getting into the forensics field.
And then ultimately you leaned more towards forensics.
Yeah, because buck per hour, you do make more money, but then how many hours are you working? And don't get me wrong, forensics is very competitive. You do have deadlines. You do have to work crazy hours sometimes, but generally there's a better work-life balance. And I just felt like, investment banking at those big banks are way past their heyday. If you can get into a private equity fund or venture capital, it's a different thing. But, these big ones, I'm like,
So
no.
would you say that a degree in, let's say, accounting and finance is still very much relevant for people going into the future if they're picking a career, or do you think that they should look at other prospects?
What was interesting with I studied accounting and finance, and then I went to work in accounting and finance and realized no one else had studied accounting.
So that's so true. So I also have a degree in finance, and then I had to teach myself accounting at a later point. Saying, well, why didn't anyone I went to a business school?
Especially, it's amazing in the UK, especially, no one actually studies what they end up working in. So I had my boss for a long time. He studied classics, which I had no idea what that was, but apparently it's like Latin and ancient Greek. How that has any practical application in the real world, I have no idea. But apparently you have to be really smart to learn these languages. And so you just basically prove that you're smart. And then you learn how to do finance on the job. So really, especially with accounting, there are pathways to become a chartered accountant coming from a non-accounting background. So there's qualifications that you do. There's, ICAEW, ACCA, CFA, all the rest of it. These are professional qualifications that you have to do anyways, even if you have a degree in accounting. So what I'd say is, if you have a passion for something, it could be, economics, could be law, could be whatever you want to do, and accounting is kind of your backup, is pursue your number one choice. And there's ways to transition back into finance and into accounting. So, it helps to study accounting, because the pathways to get your qualifications become a lot shorter, but it's not mandatory by any stretch of the imagination. But what I would say about accounting is, you'll always need accountants. I don't think AI is going to replace that. Well,
that's good news for me. So I'm glad thank you, Yahya.
And
that's why you're here. You're just here to say that alone.
You're always going to need people to count money. So, yeah.
How have you felt like your education in finance has helped you personally? Well, I know it has, but how do you feel like that has contributed to a personal life? I think that often the times that when we end up talking about money and investments, we end up stop speaking English, and it's just percentages and down points and up and down. And it's very fulfilling that even if you did get a degree in finance or accounting, you may not use it in a professional sense. You might end up doing something else, but it's such a fruitful piece of education that
Yes.
everyone that I've spoken to that studied finance or accounting, they're like, yeah, I use that for myself sometimes, even though if it's not related to my job. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Just from an accounting point of view, it's helpful to understand how transactions work. You learn debit and credit very early on, and it's easier to like if you're doing an analysis, like for example, buying a house versus renting, and you understand what a liability is, and then how much of that is actually equity versus the expense, which is interest, and all the rest of it. And you're able to build a model.
The
be
house
able
thing's so funny
to
because
assess
people
that.
see you buy a house and they're so happy with you, but then the numbers don't work and you're freaking out. They're like, why are you sad about your house? I'm like,
Yeah.
you're yelling at them. It's like, I'm bleeding money. I have lost percentages.
Exactly. And people say like, oh, when you buy a house, you're saving the rent, so the rent's going towards the house. But it's like the first 15 years of a 25-year mortgage
It's just interest.
is just interest, and you're actually hemorrhaging interest, and you've barely made a dent
Yeah.
in the overall debt. And it's not really until year 15 that you really start to bang out
Yeah.
the rest of that. And just understanding that. And understanding
Which
certain
for some
things.
people is a fair trade if rents go
Yeah.
up or things like that, but then the interest rate, blah, blah, blah. Like we could go on
Yeah.
this loops and loops.
Absolutely. And I've had some friends who, studied accounting who went into completely different fields, but just having a basic understanding of finances and how to handle money and to account for money has helped them, in their completely unrelated fields and in their personal life. So I definitely think even if you don't study accounting, pick up like a Accounting for Dummies book and just get a basic understanding
Well, what's funny
of it.
is when I started my firm, people was like, "Oh, when did you become profitable?" I'm like, "Right away." Like, why wouldn't I? I never stopped being profitable. Like, why would I run a business if it wasn't profitable? But apparently, it's very like business owners are this common saying like, "Oh, your business isn't profitable for the first like year or two." I'm like, yeah, some specific industries like when you're building like a pharmaceutical plant or something, but like I think most businesses could be profitable fairly quickly.
In the services for sure, and
Yeah.
especially if you're like doing your own trade, like you are providing tax advisory that you provide, so your overhead is very low, and basically all the money that you get is just profit, really. As you scale and you start to hire people and all the rest of it, and maybe get an office space and all the rest of it, then the margins get strained a little bit, but you'd know more about that than
I try not to give like business advice to my clients. We're just supposed to be their accounting, but there have been conversations where I'm like, Jonathan, do you really need an ice cream truck for your soccer t-shirt company? Like, I don't think you should be doing that. I think you should be like focusing on this that's making you money. And then of course, like at the end of the day, they're business owners and they do what they want. But I think that, just knowing your numbers, knowing what you're doing is just the first thing you should do. Because then, if it doesn't work out, you should probably leave a bit for an exit strategy as well.
Absolutely.
Just to wrap things up.
A good, when people want to take risk with their money, and I don't think people really have an appetite for risk as much as they think they do.
No, not at all.
And whenever they're going to put, leveraging or taking out loans or whatever, investing in something that's not, that has a high risk profile, what I say is, if you lost that, if that pile of money got burnt in front of you, are you okay with that? Like, can you live? Is your lifestyle affected? Do you have to sell your house? Do you have to, and if the answer is no, then fine, then go for it, knock yourself out. But if it's yes, then you really need to have a very, very deep think about whether you want to really go for it or not. And I think, a lot of people don't have the risk appetite that they think they do, and a lot of the people that have the risk appetite are a lot more reckless, and some of them get lucky, and that's generally the stories that you hear about.
It's good. Yeah, 5 minutes, I know.
Oh wow, already.
Yeah.
Okay, so just understand what your risk appetite is early on, and then try to stay within that.
So we've seen UAE go through so many changes. Like we could write a book about it, really. But what was the one? Do you have a moment in mind that you thought, wow, like the UAE's changed? Like, was there any one moment that you thought, oh my God, this country has changed fundamentally?
That's a great question.
I know what mine is specifically, but I'm interested to hear yours.
There's been a few moments like that. So when I went to study abroad, I stayed away for the whole year, and then I I came back, and I remembered the drive back from the airport. Some of the roads I didn't recognize anymore. And I've driven, so the Al Ain Road, so Dubai to Al Ain Road was a road that I used to drive very frequently. And I remember I hadn't been to Al Ain in a long time.
Beautiful drive. You'll see
it
camels.
is a beautiful drive, but I was driving back there, and the amount of development on the road, there's so many housing developments on that road, all the way like to Outlet Mall, which used to be in the middle of nowhere.
No, you're like,
and
why
even past Outlet
Yeah.
Mall, which is crazy. And so much of that road is just not recognizable to me anymore. But yeah, I've had a few of those where I've gone away and come back, and I was like, whoa, what happened kind of thing.
It does build very quickly. For me, it was something a lot smaller. It was Expo 2020. We went to the Australian pavilion because my wife's Australian.
Yeah, that's right.
And they were serving there were food stands, very normal. And then the food stands, they had alcohol. And there was outside during the daylight. And that was shocking to me. I was like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. There are children here. Everyone knows that if you want to, everyone knows if you want to drink in Dubai, you go to the shady back of the hotel where a bouncer looks at you, claims that you're actually 12, and you don't deserve. Like, it was so crazy.
Yeah.
Just the and I think that was like a pivotal moment, being like, okay, we're heading into a more like,
So I remember a similar moment, but I didn't think, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I used to, I'm really into tennis. So I used to watch Dubai Tennis Championships, and in one of the tournaments, this was back maybe 2012, 2013, I don't remember, or maybe even before that, the nets for the tennis tournament, which is televised, had Corona logos on either side.
Yeah, that's
And I
wild.
was like, okay, that I was not expecting that, but then it just becomes normal. But that was definitely like, oh, okay, we've shifted a little bit culturally, because I remember like when certain games came out, like GTA 5.
They just wouldn't be available.
Yeah, for a few days it was delayed because they couldn't get the right
Censorship or approvals.
Yeah, and obviously eventually, it's all fine. But there have been some of those cultural moments that, okay, we've crossed another milestone now, and for better or worse.
I guess now, looking into the future, do you think there are any milestones that they are looking to cross or will cross anytime soon?
Yeah, so I work a lot in the, as a forensic accountant in the legal field, and the laws are developing and continue to develop, and some of it is not recognizable to the layman, but just for example, the Dubai Land Department, what's it called? Disputes Resolution Center.
Yeah.
That's huge,
Yeah.
Because so much is construction and real estate.
So
and
many
whatever.
transactions happen.
Yeah. And then also the MOHRE procedures for, employee-employer disputes, those have become a lot more streamlined. So there's a lot that's happening, and a lot of it is not like, front page news.
Yeah.
But every little helps. And
that's just how the UAE grows. It's just like it's bits and pieces, and then when you see all of them piled up,
and
over
then suddenly
you're like, oh, this has all been incredibly streamlined to a point that it's so different from what it once was.
Yeah, and it's still ongoing, and there's a long way to go, I think, but it's becoming much more streamlined and much more in line, I guess, with the rest of the world in terms of legal structure and framework. So it's all going up, I think.
All right, so that's perfect, man. That's our time. I guess the only thing left is to go back to our hometown once we haven't been in the lane at the same time.
To. Yeah. Absolutely.
Go to Jabal Lafitte, go to the top of a mountain.
Yeah, we have Jabal Lafitte. Goodness. Anyways, yeah, but thanks a lot for having me. It was great spending this time with you, and hopefully we shared some interesting bits of information about what the UAE used to be like